The hardest thing was the lack of food. My mother had to get up at 2 in the morning and stand in a line because if she got there too late, there would be no food. As a child, you don't really realize how hungry you are. There were always shortages of something. It wasn't so much that material things that we lacked. It was a freedom of mind, freedom of movement, and freedom of speech. When I first came to England, of course, it was, starry-eyed. I suddenly was able to listen to the music, to the Bee Gees, to the Beatles all day long. My parents came to visit me, and that's when it all happened, when the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia. I think the hardest thing was when they closed the border a year and a half into it and said, you have to come home or else your family will suffer. By then, I already got used to freedom. I could see the difference. I had been given an opportunity to come out, and I did not want to waste it. I had a dream that I was going to do what I wanted to do. I was going to achieve it. I really felt home in America after 9/11. This is such a great nation, but when the chips are down, everyone stands next to each other, and everyone was American.
Anika Pavel's journey is one of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman who refused to let her past define her future. Anika Pavel, can you paint a picture for us of what life was like growing up in communist-ruled Czechoslovakia?
It was a lot stricter. It was more black and white, if you like, than, for example, in the life that I got used to here or the life that my children live. We were not allowed to travel. There was a very strict, there wasn't a big diversity about what children were wearing, which was good and bad. It wasn't very creative, but at the same time, there was a very little jealousy because everybody was in the same situation. The hardest thing, I think, was the lack of food. My mother had to get up at 2 in the morning and stand in a line. Even the shops didn't open till 6 because if she got there too late, there would be no food. But we were creative. We decided, my father said, okay, enough of this, it's freezing cold. And so he bought 2 rabbits and built a little home for them. And they indeed do breed like rabbits. And that's what we had, once a week, every Sunday, we had a rabbit for lunch. And and with the vegetables, my mother was very creative. And but it was also tough. There were always shortages of something. As the children, we learned to play with dirt, but at the same time, there was a certain, maybe it's because it's been a long time ago, and of course, today everything is very different, but there were no cars, so we were able to play on the street without worry about any car running us over, and we had no television. I think the hardest thing was when we became a little older and went to school and we started to learn, and we were taught at a very young age, you don't know, but as you get older, you start to realize this is wrong. You read books. We were not, I think that as a child, I had such a desire to travel. My mother always believed in traveling, and she always gave us books about travel. And we couldn't go anywhere. And so I have developed this desire to go somewhere and to see the world very early in my life. And so, as I said, as a child, you don't really realize how hungry you are or how you don't have a choices of food because nobody has it. And everyone ate the same thing, and the mother always protected us. I think it was a mental view that I was restricted to have. We could only see movies about Soviets building big factories, and it was all very strictly controlled. What we were reading, what we were learning, and it was always, America is bad and decadent, and Soviet Union is great. And but strangely enough, we were not even allowed to travel to Soviet Union, so I'm not sure what they were afraid of. But travel was simply non-existent, and so that's what formed me, what made me the desire, the imagination. And I never lacked imagination, as my mother used to say. So I would, sit at home and I would be imagining things, and how it was, I felt like practically knew London or New York before I even went there. Just imagine it from the pages of books that I read. And so that's what fed us, and that's what people felt. It's funny. It wasn't so much that material things that we lacked. It was a freedom of mind, freedom of movement. That is, and freedom of speech. That's what we really felt, a big gap. And of course, there was Beatles, so we were not allowed to have that. So.
In your mind at that time, you kind of just touched on it a little bit, but what was your vision of freedom? What did freedom actually look like to you?
At the time, freedom for me meant travel. You could go where you wanted to go. I think that really is just that one word, because when you never saw any different clothes, you don't desire it because you don't see it. And I was warm in the winter, I was cool in the summer. So as a teenager, you don't particularly, when everybody is the same as you, it doesn't really matter to you. Little bit later, once you get to be 16, 17, and you start smuggling certain magazines and you see fashion, then suddenly you think, ooh, this is very nice. I'd like to have some of that. And of course, people also had family, just like we had in America, and there would be American chewing gum, which was, of course, priced very highly. And so you want these materialist things as well. But for me, it was always the travel.
When you actually made it to London during the Prague Spring, how did your idea of freedom shift?
Well, I came to England before. What happened was that, the Dubček has started to introduce what he called the socialism with a human face. In other words, he felt that if you allow people freedom and to learn and see, they will bring these ideas back home, and we can do better, and we could have a freedom, even if he could still have the basic communist ideals. But the Soviets did not like it. And so when I first came to England, of course, it was, starry-eyed. I suddenly was able to listen to the music, to the Bee Gees, to the Beatles all day long, and I was able to communicate with people. And I learned that, I could have a fish and chips. And because being a landlocked country, fish was very scarce. We didn't have fish very often, and mostly sardines that came in cans. So it opened up the whole new world. And I remember I came to Ipswich first, and I went to see the shops in the windows, and wow, that was just amazing. And of course, miniskirts were just coming to my mind. Of course, they were a long time already in the West, but for me to see and to suddenly be able to wear some of these clothes, it was like, wow. And so, but it was also the freedom to be able to do what you wanted to do, that I could go and travel to London, take a train, and then, of course, my parents came to visit me. They were able to come and travel. And that's when it all happened when the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia, which made it in a way worse because then I was responsible for my parents suddenly. With a switch of the tank, I became an adult, and because by this time I was I was earning money, not a lot, but I was making money. I was the one with money. I was the one who spoke the language. I was the one who was suddenly in charge. So you kind of grow up really fast.
So in that moment when you were watching the Soviets invade Prague on TV, and I think at the time, if I recall correctly, your brother Jan was out of Czechoslovakia already.
Right.
Your parents were with you. You were all in London, but then your brother Pavel was still back home, and he was not able to get out. And he called, and he was asking your parents if he should stay or if he should try to go. When your dad told Pavel to stay, what was running through your head? Did you think, okay, I have to go back to Czechoslovakia as well, or were you already planning on staying in Ipswich?
I really wasn't, to be honest with you, I did not think about myself. My only concern was my parents. My father was older, and my mother was, I knew my mother was battling cancer. And I did not know, some of that propaganda, that communist propaganda, was in my head. I had no idea that in England they had National Health Service, that I could have taken my parents to the hospital. I had no idea because it was hammered in me that people who get sick die and nobody cares. So I did not want I knew I didn't have enough money to take care of my mother's illness. And so, although I would have, if my father would have said stay, I would have worked hard day and night just to make sure that everything will be okay. But my father also, for him, he just did not want to load this responsibility of my mother and to suddenly become in charge of everybody. He did not want that on me. He did it for me, and it was always very emotional for me till this day that somehow my brother was sacrificed because he couldn't come out. And my older brother then came home too. And I had at the time a visa to stay longer, so I didn't have to go home at that time. So I knew I could stay, and so then afterwards I would. Both of my brothers were at university. They were studying English and Slovak language. My older brother became a teacher, and so I would send them books for school, and of course they were both Liverpool fanatics. So I would send them some Liverpool scarves and stuff. And so I did the best I could. And then, as you know, the background that, the backdrop I had with Mrs. Landis, who was a wonderful person and would have helped me. But then she had to go to prison, and I've lost my home, the temporary home, or the home such as it was again, and I was completely alone on a street in London. But I just always looked forward. I was thinking, how am I going to get out of this? And so I was lucky that he offered me a job. And, it was difficult, but I managed it. And then I was lucky to win a competition and be a model. But that was still very rocky road. It wasn't like I went from working in a solicitor's office to being a model, because it's a long journey. You have to get, you have to start. You don't become a star overnight. And like anybody in a modeling or acting industry will tell you, behind that day when you make it, there are usually years of hard work. There is a preliminary to making it. And so I was working as a waitress, I was working as a cashier, I had a lots of different jobs because I had to also always think of my family at home and always try to help as much as I could. I think the hardest thing was when they closed the border year and a half into it and said, you have to come home or else your family will suffer. That was hard because by then I already got used to freedom. I could see the difference. And also I did not know what would happen. I could have been selected, somebody could have said, oh, she's a spy. And so I think that probably was the hardest thing I have ever, ever, ever had to face. To this day, it's hard to even think about it.
To me, that story of the Czechoslovakia declaring that you had to come home no matter what, knowing that if you didn't, your family was going to pay the price for it. But if you did, you were at the same time giving up freedom. To me, that choice that you were posed with, to me, was like something I can't even relate to. And then how it all unfolded, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of continue the story of what ended up happening and the choice that you had to make, because I have some follow-up questions afterwards, and I'd be interested to get your take. But how things unfolded just kind of blew my mind.
Yes, so I did then decided that I have had a kind of a boyfriend who was really a friend, and I have decided to go home. But he said to me, "Look, you've got to the Brit." I have to back up. When Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia, Britain said that everybody who is from Czechoslovakia can stay in England and have automatic work permit as long as they want. So I was okay on that side. But when they ordered me to come back, my two brothers definitely would have had a hard time find a job. My father was retiring, my mother was sick. But by that time, I was really in danger, and eventually it proved right because when I eventually did come as an English citizen, I was told, you're being followed. Be careful where you go, who you speak to, because you followed. And so at the time, he offered to marry me. And it was like people, it's hard to imagine what burden it was. And that was taken off my shoulder. It felt like, there's an earthquake. And of course, I fell madly in love with the person, but he really was just being kind. And so it broke my heart, and it was my first heartbreak, and probably the most painful one till this day, because it was, it was also like the kindness that weighed on me. It's difficult to explain, but it was not just the fact that he explained to me, he just wanted to help me. And that was one thing, but it was also like I somehow wanted to prove to him how thankful I am, how grateful I am. And I wasn't able to even do that. So never mind my heart, it was my desire. I was always brought up that repay kindness with kindness. And, I think I often thought about this, but actually in this conversation, I'm realizing I think what really hit me harder than breaking my heart, the love, was the fact that I was unable to ever repay the kindness.
When I heard that Finley offered to marry you in order to give you the ticket out of that situation, I just sat back and thought for a while, because it's hard to, in today's day and age, to think that somebody would be willing to be that kind and that generous to help somebody else in today's day and age. And
Yes.
so when when did you actually feel free of the Soviet grip? Like when was the first time you finally felt like they weren't the Soviet Union and communism wasn't looming over your life?
After the Velvet Revolution. Until then, it was every time I came home, there was always a cloud. Even when I've been married with my children, even then, you knew that you were followed. You knew, everybody knew where I was, what I was doing, who I was speaking to. So it really wasn't until the Velvet Revolution when you really could come. And I think I write about it how first time I came, it was really vivid how people spoke louder. There was more laughter on the street. There was a different atmosphere. It was palpable. It was almost, you could almost touch it, how different it was.
Do you think people in free countries today truly understand what it means to be free, or does it look different depending on your history and your upbringing?
I think that it's if you never ever have your freedom taken away, it's hard to imagine what it's like. It's like when I was home, other than the travel, I didn't really miss it as much because I didn't know what it's like to have that freedom. It's like how I did not know what was truth, what wasn't. We just simply didn't believe the newspapers. But when you never heard the opposite, you kind of have nothing to compare it with. I think that if once you do realize, I didn't realize how oppressed we really were until I had the freedom. That's when I realized the difference.
When you left during the Prague Spring to go stay with Mrs. Landis, and were your intentions just to go until your visa ran out, or were your intentions to go and find a way to never have to go back to living in Czechoslovakia?
Oh no, I absolutely was going to come back. I had no intention of staying. I went there to learn to speak English, and then my desire, because I was always a writer, writing was my heart. I was hoping to become a journalist, and I thought that being able to be able to say you lived in London and you traveled a little bit, so and being able to speak the language well enough, you know, because things were getting better, I was naive enough to think that it would be a plus. Ultimately, it would have been a huge minus. But at the time, I did not intend to. It was shocking because, Prague Spring, it was like we couldn't believe it. I mean, people truly, truly believe it. Believe that we will have a better life. We will be able to travel. We will be, people did start to travel. Suddenly you could go to Hungary, you could go to Yugoslavia. And, so people really did believe that it was going to be, okay. But that's not what the Russians thought.
So up until that point, in I think it was January of '68 when Dubek said, "Hey, it's okay to travel. We're going to loosen the reins a little bit." Was there hope that things were going to get better, or what was kind of how were people coping with what was going on with the Soviet rule?
Well, people gave up. Nobody really intended to do anything. And I was incredibly lucky because, as I said in a book, people used to laugh at me. Yeah, I was like a joke of the town. Oh, she's going to London. Hey, look at her. Here's a Londoner, because it just was like, are you crazy? But it was November 1967. And in January, Dubček came into, the Dubček new regime started to come. But people who were in the offices already knew that things were different. And therefore, they gave me a visa for 3 months. And I just wanted to go, if it was for 3 months. And then, of course, in January and February, everything changed. And I got a visa for 2 years or 2.5 years. And so it kind of happened in increments in some ways. And so then I tell you, after that, everybody was traveling. Like, you know, after that speech when Dubček booted out Novotny, it's just everybody was traveling. It was like, wow, somebody would have had a travel agency would have made a lot of money. Everybody just wanted to travel. I mean, both of my brothers came, my parents came, just my family. There was like 5 people just from my family, and just about everybody. So, so it was amazing.
I hope you're enjoying this episode brought to you by LifeEdge. Did you know that we offer more than just the podcast? LifeEdge is your top source for vetted online courses and coaches to help you gain an edge in life. Visit thelifeedge.com or click the link below and sign up for our Elite Educator Pass. This gives you access to free trial offers, masterclasses, and discount codes from our partner brands that will help you level up your skill set. Now back to our episode. Can you help me understand a little bit better? Because my understanding of communism and from what I was taught in history, which I'm starting to realize what I was taught and what actually happened might not be what are two separate things a lot of the times. But you talk a lot about how your dad was running a tailoring business out of the house and he was making garments for everyone in the village. Was he having to do that secretively? Or like, because I thought that you couldn't necessarily run your own business because that kind of went against the whole
Right.
communism as a collective. So how was he able to do that?
Everybody, it was, there was a funny saying that people had: he who doesn't steal from the government steals from his family. And so people basically, he was dressing everybody, and everybody was doing it. You just had to do it very quietly. You couldn't put up a shingle and say, tailoring business, Jan Kočvara. People came and, he was making clothes for every policeman. And so everybody, it was sort of like, as long as you didn't brag, as long as you didn't do it in your face, it was accepted, and everyone did it. And everyone went to work. My father worked, all night, but he used to be still able to sew. And eventually he was allowed to work in a shop. And, but everybody worked on the side. If you wanted to get your house painted, I don't think there even was such a thing as, I guess it was some official place you could go to get your house painted, but nobody did, because it would be done badly. So, it was a weird kind of a understanding, like you don't tell us and we don't tell you, it's, it was like you go shopping, you had to give somebody money or piece of clothing or something. There were always shortages, and so people learned to manipulate the government, and everybody was doing it. People who were high up, they all had summer homes, not ordinary people. So everyone was keeping eyes closed to everybody else. So it was just one gigantic fraud, really. And that's why I think it eventually just busted, because it's, and Dubček felt like, let's not pretend and let's give people incentives and they will work hard. Or the other thing was saying, we pretend to work and we pretend to pay you. That was kind of a golden rule.
As I sit here and I think about your story and the journey that led us to literally sitting here in this moment having this conversation, and the amount of courage that you had to continue moving forward, taking the next step, whether you were sleeping in a phone booth for the night or having to go find a job because you had to walk out of your job due to maybe some sexual harassment issues that were going on, and you just constantly were moving forward. And now there were times when you would take a minute and you would allow yourself to understand the weight of what you're doing, and you might have had some emotional issues, or not emotional issues, but like breakdowns, which I think we all would with some of the stuff you faced. But what was your driving force? What kept you moving forward to build the life and have the success that you had?
It was really my family. I knew my family was relying on me. My mother's health at various points depended on me, and also I guess I had this imagination and I had this vision of what I wasn't going. I had been given an opportunity to come out, and I had always recognized that with all the problems, I also had a lot of luck, and I did not want to waste it. And and at the time, I also still thought I was going to be a writer, which didn't take place until much, much, much later in my life. But I had a dream that I was going to do what I wanted to do. I was going to achieve it, and I also had so it was twofold. I felt I owed it to myself after already what I've been through, and I owed it to my family to take care of them. And I just always felt that going backwards was not. I'd never learned to bicycle backwards, and I wasn't going to walk backwards either. So the going back was never an option.
Do you believe in manifestation, like that you manifest your dreams and your thoughts?
Within a reason. Within a reason. Yes, but I always had a healthy dose of reality. Um, so, like, have I envisioned myself going to the moon? Yes, but I also knew that was never going to happen. And but did I envision that I was going to write a book? Yes, and I did it because it was something I knew I could do. I had a visions, but I have, for better or worse, my visions were never out of reach, except, yeah, they were never out of reach because I had a wish I could be a singer, but I am tone deaf, so I knew that was not going to happen. And so I think my visions, perhaps I wish I would have achieved in certain lines a little bit more. Perhaps I should have started writing a little sooner. Um, Perhaps I should not given up, with the modeling and acting so soon. But but I knew why I did it, and I don't regret it. And I have a wonderful family to be proud of that I can look at, and that's why I did it. And when I was giving up my dream of being making it higher on a level of modeling and acting, I always knew that what was more important to me was to have a family. And what ultimately was my goal was right. So I was not giving it up for nothing. I was giving it up in order to be able to pursue my ultimate desire, which was always to write. So
Do you
yeah.
think do you think that if you were 14 to 16 years old today and you were leaving an oppressive country, do you think that you would be able to would have a very similar experience in the world, as far as being somebody who's coming to a new country, not speaking the same language? Do you feel you would be treated the same way? Do you feel you would have the same opportunities, or would things be very different today?
Well, I think it depends which country I would be coming from and which country I would be coming to.
That's fair.
Um,
Yeah.
so that would make a huge difference. But
What
generally speaking, I think it is harder now than it was then. I would think.
throughout the beginning of your book, you talked about how when you were in London and moving around the different towns in London and cities in London, that you felt that some people were more generous to you just because you were from Czechoslovakia. Can you explain that? That's not something I'm understanding. What was the importance or significance of Czechoslovakia to London?
Well, I think it's because Czechoslovakia is close to England. It's not very far. And the Soviet invasion in Czechoslovakia was televised and was in a paper, and people were really outraged. I think in America it was a little bit of a less of a news
Mm,
because America is a little bit removed and a little bit of a small country. And I think that the world was divided. There was an Iron Curtain. There was a East and there was West, and there was a Warsaw Pact, and then there was NATO, and one did not interfere with the other. And I think that's how it was viewed in a lot of the world. But the English people viewed it a little differently because it was little close, too close for comfort, if you like, and it was viewed more. And I just find that people were so. A lot of the English were outraged that there wasn't more of a help and more of a action. With time, I have learned why that happened. As I said, the world was divided, and it was understood. Would if England, if America invaded different country, would Soviet Union stay off? I don't know. I tend to doubt, but maybe they would. But there was an agreement, the world agreement, and I think that's why NATO stayed out. NATO stayed out, but the British people didn't. They were like so incredibly kind to me and my brothers, and they were really helpful. But again, not everybody. I had people who didn't like me, people who thought, I was a foreigner and I was this and that, and you in every country you will have a different people. But on the whole, I had, despite of some rough experiences, I would say mostly it was positive.
Did you view when you left Czechoslovakia? Did you view yourself as an expat or an immigrant, or what was your identity at the time?
You mean when I was leaving Czechoslovakia?
Well, yeah, once you left and you were in Ipswich and you're traveling, how did you
Oh,
view
okay, in
yourself at
England.
that? Yeah.
You know, I really, I thought of myself as sort of a citizen of the world. I really didn't belong anywhere. I say it in my book, and it's really, really true. Um, I really felt home in America after 9/11. That
Mm,
really shook me up. And then I really felt this is where I belong. Until then, I was kind of like, you know, traveling around, Robinson Crusoe. Like I went lived there. Everywhere I came, it was home. Whether I was in Hong Kong, I made it my home. Whether I was in America, it was my home. We went to Monte Carlo, that was my home. I made home. Home was where I was. That's how I felt for a very, very long time until 9/11. And then I became American, and I truly, not just by papers, but by heart.
hmm. What was so impactful for you about 9/11?
It was like Soviet invasion in the most extreme horror Stephen King version. And it was so unfair, so inhuman. And the two sides were just so very different. And the carnage was so awful that it made me realize this is wrong, and this is these people, and also to watch. I was at the time living in New Jersey, and so we could see it, and how everyone gathered together. You know, we had meals, and there was clothing. They needed T-shirts. Everyone ready their husbands' T-shirts and went to buy, so that they needed to change clothes. From the firemen needed to, and those who were going through the rebels, they needed to change clothes constantly, and that every restaurant was delivering meals. It was, to me, it was so beautiful how people got together, and it just thought, this is such a great nation. When chips are down, they might be bickering, but when the chips are down, this is unbelievable how, I've got goosebumps. It's unbelievable how they get together and everyone stands next to each other. And everyone was American. The Canadians, wherever the people were coming from, they were all Americans. And so I felt, yeah, I belong here. I want to belong here.
Throughout your story, what is the moment you look back on and you're the most proudest of?
Other than my children, you don't want to get me start bragging. Okay, I think that the moment was when I could have my parents come to when I could come have my parents come, and when I could help my brother to start his own life, because he was persecuted at home, and that made me feel good, made me feel proud, and of course, having published the book, I think that's something I'm very proud of, because I've always relied on myself. And my motto was always, God help those who help themselves. And I never looked right and left who could help me. I always looked in a mirror and said, okay, how am I going to deal with this? And I dealt with it, whatever it might have been.
What do you think in today's society, in our view of an immigrant, or the overarching view of immigration, what are some of the misconceptions, or what are some of the things that we're missing when we look at somebody and we say, "Oh, they're an immigrant," and it just seems, even just saying that to me sounds very judgmental.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Um, it's it's a sad situation because we all come from somewhere, especially in America, and I think that there is a people have a fear of unknown, and instead of finding out what that unknown is, where they come from, what is their circumstances, what do they? I mean, I have come across, there were people who were engineers and were working as a waiters because they had to first learn to speak English and get their whereabouts, and had to immediately eat. You cannot take your resume around and wait till you get hired. And so I think that's the biggest misconception, where I guess I would say it's a lazy mind. Learn about the people, find out before you pass the judgment, find out. And it is sad that people also, it's sad that few can influence many. Is there a bad apple? But have you ever bought a bushel of apples where there was none that was bad? I haven't. And so I think that people should treat everybody by one, find out what they are like. And, I remember, as silly as it sounds, when I came to England and they would say to me, "Oh, in Czechoslovakia, do you have a television?" It seems like a silly question, but it was a desire to know. Do you have a television? How much do you know? How much did you learn? Behind that question, there is actually more. That question actually answers more than people might think. And I think that sometimes asking a simple questions, what did you study in school, for example, it might answer the person who is mowing your lawn, might answer what those people are really like. And there are a lot of people who do jobs that are way beneath them because they need to get their feet on the ground. They need to learn, perfect their English. They need to do medicine is a perfect example. You have to take exams first before you do it. If you come and you are a lawyer, you have to not only master English really well, you also have to take a law exam. So it's just because somebody's doing a different manual job, it doesn't mean that they are not educated. And I think this is the biggest misconception. And not everybody who comes is uneducated, but everyone is wiped out as people who are uneducated and are going to just, rely on a wrong way of getting ahead. So I think that's really try and be more curious, you know?
I feel as a society, we've lost the openness to help others. And I think it's because we've become more fearful of others. And so we don't, when you don't feel safe, it's hard to be curious. And I think we've hit a place where it's hard to feel safe that I'm not going to be judged on both ends, right? From
Right.
both perspectives. And so, do you think that's something we can overcome?
I hope so. I really hope so. Um, I mean, especially in America, there are so many immigrants that hopefully, as they rise, as the older immigrants rise to certain levels, they will look at the new immigrants a little differently because they've been through it. And they will respect the work they do, even and will know that is not necessarily what they are educated for. You do what you can get. So many times you hear on television talking to people and who really made it in America. And then you learn that their parents have an accent like mine. You know? So how far off the immigration ladder are these people, really? And that's what we need to remind ourselves. People should turn around and see the grandma or the mother or the father or both and look at other people with kinder eyes and realize they would not be here. They would not be successful. They would not be where they are. Would that parent or grandparent made that journey, that difficult journey? It's never easy to leave your home. It's hard. And so we would do better if we just remembered that.
What are you wanting the message of your story to be? When readers read your book and they read your story, what are you wanting them to feel? What are you wanting to learn? And what is the impact you want to leave with them?
I think that what I would like people to realize you know, all of us have a strengths that we don't really know we have until it's called upon to utilize it. And I think that we should give kindness. Every one of us has kindness in us. And I, for example, find it difficult not to help others when I see that they need help, which was one of the reasons why I have, chaired so many charities. And if everybody just helped everybody and looked at everybody, how can I help this person? Then we will not be so threatened by them. Do it for selfish reason. Hey, if I help you, you owe me your kindness. If nothing else. For whatever reason you find why you want to do that, just do it. Taking an older person across the road. It's simple. But, when you like the lawyer giving me a job, it was a small thing, but it was huge for me because I didn't have to look for a job. And it was heavy on my shoulders because I knew I had an accent. Who is going to employ me? And just like that, doing that, all that was taken away. So if you can do any small thing, nothing is too small. People should not view they help, it's not going to make any difference. Yes, it does. Every little thing that you can do to help somebody, it helps.
My favorite question that I love to ask all of our guests at the end is, what is one lesson that you've learned in life that you want to make sure you share with the listener?
I lived by a very simple rule. I really believe what goes around comes around. If you give out kindness, you help, you offer help, one day somebody will do the same to you. And I really, really believe in that. My kids called me that I'm a queen of cliches. But I always say to them, you know what? Those cliches that's been here for hundreds of years, there's a reason for it. And that reason is they're true. They are well tried. And I would say to everybody, just give a little and you will receive. And I really, really believe, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I know that I catch myself sometimes when I'm in a hurry or in a bad mood and I do something that I know I shouldn't. Something I get paid back. On the other hand, when I do something that I didn't have to do, and people say, why you didn't have to do that, I get paid back with something else. It's not apples and oranges. It's not like, for sake of argument, I give somebody $1 and I find $1 somewhere else. It could be, I give somebody $1, but I get a job somewhere. Or my child will call me up that I've been worried about. Everything's okay, Mom. To me, that is the circle, the circle of kindness.
Where can the listener go to learn more about you, connect with you, or buy your book, Encounter with the Future?
That, by the way, is a picture of me. At the age of 18. So you can go to www.anikapavel.com and there's a connection directly to Amazon. And I'm also on a Instagram and on a Facebook. I don't have too much of a presence because I'm too busy writing. And what you might not know, I have 8 grandchildren, so 8 under 8.
That sounds very busy.
I rest my case.
And for anyone that's listening, I will make sure to include all those links down below so that you can connect with Anika. You can pick up her book. I highly recommend reading the book. It's a great read. I finished it in about 2.5 days because the way Anika tells her story and what she's sharing is so powerful. And I generally read business books, not too many into biographies. And this book captivated me. And not only did I learn about myself, and it challenged me in a lot of ways in my own personal life, but I actually learned some really good principles that translate into business and growth. And so I highly recommend checking out the book, reading through the book, and understanding some of our history, because it really puts in perspective how free we are and the opportunities that we have. And so I highly recommend checking it out. Anika, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story in the book, but also taking time to sit here and share your story with me.
It was my honor. Thank you very much.
Yep. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe so that we can continue to get amazing guests on here like Anika Pavel. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye.